It's a heart-wrenching sight. It's also been described as New Zealand's worst ecological disaster since the Rena oil spill. And hundreds of Kiwis are donating their time to Operation Tidy Fox, in an effort led by DOC to clear the Fox River of more than 5,000 tonnes of landfill after a storm ripped open a disused landfill in March. Rubbish was washed out across the coast, and there's a bit of a race against time before new rains come in a couple of months. Some say that the local council, the Western District Council, has been out of their depth on this one. Others say that they responded as soon as possible because but resources are stretched, and our time is stretched. Actually, we're almost up against it. So we should really go to our guest first up, Owen Kilger, the incident controller at Fox River. Owen, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Look, it sounds extraordinary, the scale, but just tell us a bit about the scale of the operation. How much is there to clean up?
So we're talking about cleaning up the whole of the Fox River. We've divided it into a couple of zones. The majority of the rubbish is in the first 5 kilometres of the river, and then there's more in the further 16 kilometres down to the sea, and then around 60 kilometres of coastline that we need to clear.
Yeah, so just a word out, how can people get involved if they're listening? A huge mission. How can they get involved?
So we certainly still need a lot of help, and for people to get involved, go to the Department of Conservation website, look at Operation Tidy Fox, and you'll find a link there where you can get all your information and sign up on a calendar for the days you're available.
All right, very, very good indeed. Are you confident that it will be cleaned up, or because it's a race against time, isn't it? These rains will come in a couple of months.
It certainly is a race, but we're making amazing progress. We're getting huge support from both volunteers and New Zealand Defence Force, and we're tracking well to clean up the majority of rubbish before we'd anticipate spring rains.
All right, good on you. Owen Kilger there, the incident controller at Fox River. I mean, Bill, I don't know where the landfill sites are in Hawke's Bay or near where you are, but this is an issue for local LGNZ, isn't it? Because it seems to be that a lot of our landfill sites are actually not far from the coast. So this type of thing can happen.
Or a river. Or a flood-prone river. What genius all those years ago said, let's put the landfill down by the river.
Yeah, and here near Auckland, just up in the Dome Valley, north of Warkworth and before you get to Welsford, there's applications underway to put a major, massive landfill for Auckland and Northland into the source area of the Hutio River, which runs into the Kaipara Harbour. Have you ever heard anything as crazy as that? And it's being treated seriously by council and everyone else. Massive local opposition.
So we're not learning our lesson?
No.
No, well, I mean, down here at Te Wanga, there's a very big landfill right on the banks of the Tuki River. Now, admittedly, they've got the big flood banks there they've built, but, why would you go near a river?
Yeah. Someone said before we go, I went through the Danish school system and I witnessed very little bullying there. It is such an egalitarian society with a generous welfare system that is ingrained in kids early on to support the underdog and to help those less fortunate. So there you go. You have both been wonderful. Thank you very much. Agreed, disagreed. Lots of stuff was discovered, talked about rather. Sue Bradford and Bill Ralston, thank you for being with us today.
Kia ora, Wallace.
All right, Checkpoint next. I'm back with you tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Kei te whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irarangi au Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Parity. You can watch us live on Facebook at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. We're also on Freeview Channel 50 and we're on Face TV Sky Channel 83. Coming up on tonight's program, the reaction to a stunning win for the Silver Ferns, the new world champions of netball. They overcame the Aussies by a single point. But why aren't they being paid and what can be done about it? Stuart Nash announces more on guns. The second tranche of gun reform will introduce a new licensing and registering system. We will have the Minister straight after, or more or less straight after, the 5 o'clock news. We'll have more from Donald Trump escalating his attacks on Liberal Democratic Congresswomen. All of that to come tonight on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is to establish a firearms register and make major changes to the licensing regime. In the aftermath of the March 15th shootings, the government made certain weapons illegal and set up a buyback scheme. A second bill will set up a national register and require licences to be renewed every 5 years from the current 10 and impose a licensing regime on gun clubs and ranges. Police scrutiny of a licence holder will also be triggered if they're red flagged, for example, committing a crime involving violence or alcohol. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the March attack highlighted flaws in the system.
Our gun laws date from 1983 and they're dangerously out of date with technology, with trade and ultimately with society. The changes announced today have been decades in the making, and it is now up to this Parliament to deliver in the interests of public and personal safety.
Jacinda Ardern. The bill is likely to be introduced to Parliament next month. The police have charged a Coatesville man with making a false statement about his firearms being stolen. They say the 25-year-old claimed someone broke into his garage and stole a pistol and a rifle last week. Annika Smith reports.
The police made inquiries after receiving the burglary report, but say the man eventually admitted he'd hidden the firearms at his property north of Auckland. They say officers found the guns, along with 2 other semi-automatic firearms, in a ceiling cavity in his home. The 25-year-old man has been charged with making a false statement and will appear in the North Shore District Court on Friday. The police say while most gun owners have abided by new gun laws, this case reminds those who don't comply that they may face prosecution. Ko Annika Smith aho.
The bomb squad has been called to Taupo's police station after a piece of historic military equipment was brought to police. The station and several surrounding buildings on Story Place in Taupo were evacuated just after 1 this afternoon. Among them, the Rotary Club, where Rosemary Crisp is the secretary.
A police officer went over and said that the Rotary House had to be evacuated and it would be cordoned off for the rest of the day whilst this squad came down from Auckland to investigate a mystery package.
Rosemary Crisp says the club has had to move its evening meeting to a Taupo restaurant. She says it's the second time a piece of military equipment has caused an evacuation at the station in the past few months. Auckland Council says it has no evidence yet that anyone was asked to leave the West Wave pool in Henderson for wearing burkinis. It's apologised to the Muslim women who have made the complaint, and it has contacted one to hear from them directly. Jane Aiken from the council says its swimwear guidelines need to be clearer for customers and staff. She says the council is supportive of any form of swimwear and want customers to feel comfortable without the fear of judgment. Investigations are ongoing, and in the meantime, council staff will be reminded of the swimwear guidelines. A couple living near Friday's gas explosion in Christchurch have told of their lucky escape. 5 people remain in hospital, one in a critical condition after the blast, which has left 5 neighbouring homes uninhabitable. Barry Hobson's home has sustained major damage, including gibboard blown off walls and ceilings, and windows and doors ripped from the walls. Concrete tiles from the home have exploded and lodged themselves in his lawn and pierced the iron on his roof. Mr Hobson says 20 minutes before the blast, he had decided to visit his daughter, and his wife joined him.
19 out of 20 times she's at home, and this particular day she decided to come for a ride with me, so she wasn't home, so she's very lucky. Like if Kate had been home and putting the washing out, she would have been bombarded with all that rubble.
Barry Hobson is now waiting to see if their home can be repaired. A New Zealand permanent resident says it beggars belief that his electronic visa could not be read at Auckland Airport, the main entry point in the country it was issued. American Adam Campbell says he was prepared to have to show his Immigration New Zealand e-visa letter confirming his status when leaving Beijing, but surprised to be asked for it on arrival in New Zealand. Mr Campbell says the e-visa fail means the letter is one more thing to think of when travelling.
You know, by the end of my travels, the piece of paper was kind of crumpled up in a corner of my backpack, and, it was just, it's kind of one of those things that's like, you just don't want to lose it.
Adam Campbell questions the security of the e-visa letter, which is a printout of an email attachment. Immigration New Zealand says it has issued more than 1 million e-visas and is not aware of any problems for travellers. It's coming up to 5 past 5. There's uncertainty over whether Nolene Taurua will continue as Silver Ferns coach in the wake of the side's shock netball World Cup win in Liverpool. Taurua will return to Australia tomorrow to resume her duties with Sunshine Coast Lightning and says she'll reassess her future plans at the conclusion of the Australian domestic season in September. Taurua has only been in the job 11 months but has transformed the Silver Ferns after their Commonwealth Games failure in April last year, where they finished out of the medals for the first time. But she admits it's been difficult juggling both jobs. The Australian swimmer Mac Horton has received a standing ovation at the Athletes' Village after protesting against Chinese star Sun Yang's 400-metre freestyle win at the World Champs in South Korea. Horton, the Olympic champion, finished second to Sun but refused to join him on the podium. Horton's unhappy that Sun, who served a doping ban in 2014, was allowed to compete ahead of a Court of Arbitration for Sport hearing, where the 10-time world champion has been accused of smashing vials of his own blood with a hammer during a clash last year with drug testers. Here's the BBC's Hal Griffith.
The enmity between the two swimmers goes back to 2014 when Sung Yan was suspended for 3 months for failing a drugs test. He currently faces more allegations of breaching doping rules, which could see him banned from next year's Olympics. After losing to Sung Yang in the 400 metres final, Mac Horton said he was frustrated and refused to take to the podium for the Chinese national anthem. Sung Yang said his opponent had shown disrespect to China.
Hal Griffith with that report. And that's the news.
The Silver Ferns are netball world champions again.
Going into the final, everyone was thinking there is nothing to say that this New Zealand side can't do this. And today they showed that they can.
A 16-year drought broken.
It has been a long time coming. In every game that we've played or every camp, it was about being better.
And what next for the victorious coach?
You're not a leader unless people want to follow you. And Nolene has a passion about the game and knows how to handle people.
On the Ball Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corrindan, weekdays from 6 on air, online and on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, are New Zealanders missing out on key information about their risk of developing breast cancer? And after 10, Symphony in C, American scientist and musician Robert Hazen on his book about carbon. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, fine spells and a few showers. Auckland to Kapiti, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, but the odd shower about Auckland tonight and about Bay of Plenty and Central High Country from tomorrow afternoon. Areas of morning fog as well. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers developing, then turning to scattered rain tomorrow. Wellington, fine weather tonight, low cloud or fog tomorrow morning and a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine but low cloud and drizzle developing about coastal Marlborough later tomorrow. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, low cloud about the east coast and Canterbury Plains with patchy drizzle tomorrow, mainly fine elsewhere. Chatham Islands, a few showers. You're with RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Alex Parity here joining you tonight for Checkpoint. And first, of course, we go to the ultimate story of redemption. That's how the Silver Ferns' victory over defending champions Australia in the Netball World Cup final is being billed. It's been 16 long years since New Zealand last claimed the crown and caps off a remarkable turnaround for the Ferns under their coach Nolene Taurua. Sports reporter Ravinda Hunia is in Liverpool and has all the details of the 52-51 victory.
It's New Zealand's first World Cup title in 16 years and 5th overall. The last time they tasted glory was in Jamaica in 2003. There were some early nerves from goal shoot Maria Falau, but she came good when it mattered, and Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua says the veteran is a big game player.
She's been consistent in that ability to be able to perform no matter what. Today is probably one of the areas once again that one of the days again that she's shown out there. We're so happy that she's part of our team.
The scores were tied after the first quarter, and the Ferns had a strong second period to take a 3-goal lead at half-time. They stretched that lead by as many as 7 goals in the third before the Diamonds started closing in. Australia scored the first 3 goals in the final spell to take it to within 1. Katrina Rore pulled off a huge deflection with 3 minutes left to give New Zealand another boost.
Oh, there's no option. Oh, Rore! That was bound to happen. The mid-quarters were so close to each other. This could be a game-breaking play for the Ferns.
Thodua says she's thrilled with the way Rore came back from being dropped and then an injury setback which threatened to rule her out of the World Cup.
Knowing that her experience was going to be vital, she's done an amazing job to move from goal defence to wing defence, but also with that mix of her, Casey and also Jane in there was something in my head. Just waited to see if we could play out, so she's been amazing for us.
Defender Casey Korpua picked up the Most Valuable Player award. Korpua, who has finished bridesmaid at the last 3 World Cups, says she was able to keep going knowing it was the last 60 minutes of her career.
So even when I was hunched over or, people are yelling at me to do stuff, I really appreciated it to get through right to the end. Yeah. It actually feels like a fairy tale, and I can't wait to give my mum and dad a hug because they've supported me right from the start.
The Silver Ferns hit rock bottom at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games last year when they finished 4th. But coach Thodua made major changes when she came on board in August last year. Captain Laura Langman said the win hadn't quite sunken in, but it was a result of hard work.
We just had a real focus on doing your job and doing it well. I think everybody we came away with 12 strong players and everyone contributed, and that's the environment we wanted to start creating in August, and I feel like we've made massive inroads into that.
It was a remarkable result given how Australia have dominated New Zealand in recent times, winning 8 of the 9 clashes since the start of 2018. Australian coach Lisa Alexander says while Thodua would have learnt a lot from coaching in the Australian League, she still brought her own unique brand.
She should be lauded for what she's done for New Zealand netball. She's got it right back on the map again, and it's an amazing achievement.
It's no rest for the wicked. Thodua and Langman have to head back to Australia soon to prepare their game this Saturday in the Australian Super League.
The Vitality Netball World Cup 2019 champions are New Zealand!
From Liverpool, Koravinda Huniatene.
Remarkable turnaround there, and the Silver Ferns probably can't put a price on that World Cup victory today, but their win has renewed questions about pay equity for female sportspeople after officials confirmed that there was no prize money for the winners. By contrast, the Black Caps reaped $3 million for coming second, if you could call it that, in the Cricket World Cup just last week. I asked Women in Sport Aotearoa CEO Rachel Froggatt what she makes of the pay disparity.
In terms of the pay equity and prize money question, something like this of such a momentous, occurrence really brings into very hard limelight the disparity between women's sport and men's sport when it comes to, the commercial opportunity for the athletes performing within those sports. And I think, unfortunately, netball, despite it being one of the biggest women's sports in the world, is still suffering from a historical lack of investment from government, from broadcasters and from sponsors, creating a situation like this where despite, the performance, the prize money simply isn't there.
Yeah, we understand, of course, like any sport, it's a business model. Sport has been a business. Successful sport has had to follow the business model. I don't watch a lot of netball, but from the results I've seen over the last decade or so, it's always a spectacle. It's always a close encounter. This was another 1-point victory by the Silver Ferns. Is it just that not enough countries are playing it? What's the problem?
It's a combination of things, I think. It's particularly a sport that is very well kind of played within the Commonwealth nations, as you might have sort of gathered. And so there is, I think, at the top level, perhaps not as many teams playing as we would like to have, in the future. However, the quality, as you say, has been just exceptional right across the board. And when you look at, the level of play from your Englands, from your Australias, from your New Zealand, it's a battle. They are the mighty Silver Ferns. You're watching athletes at the top of their game really going at it. But I think that underneath that, there's still an ongoing pervasive idea that somehow women's sport is less entertaining or less engaging for the audience. And so for sponsors and for broadcasters and for other potential investors, when they're coming down to prioritising where their money is going, they're still, unconsciously in most part, leaning towards men's sport as the direction that they go in. And I think some of this has to do with the visibility of women's sport. Some of this has to do with, historical sort of investment levels from within the governing bodies or the national bodies in those countries. But there's a real challenge at hand here, and I think that we are really at a turning point now with women's sport, and particularly with netball. The audience is definitely there, and that's a very old argument. You hear this one a lot. Oh, nobody watches women's sport. I'm sorry, but half of New Zealand was up last night watching the World Cup final. So.
And the competition can be as close as it likes, and it can be entertaining, but it's a brutal, cutthroat world out there, and you've got to compete with other sports. What do you think about the rise in recent years of other sports, traditional male sports that women are now playing to a very, very high professional degree, sevens rugby, just 15-a-side rugby, sports like that? Do you feel with netball that was also threatened in that way?
I don't think it's threatened. My honest feeling, and this is something we've discussst a lot at Women in Sport Aotearoa, is that women's sport, it's a very different world from men's sport, and we're actually all in it together. So everybody doing well and everybody pushing ahead together actually supports the growth as a whole. So it's actually been a fantastic thing to see teams like the Black Ferns coming through, the White Ferns coming through, because the professionalism and the entertainment and the ability that they have to pull audiences brings authenticity to women's sport as a whole. And, netball isn't the only flag bearer now, and they've done brilliantly for decades, doing that for New Zealand. But I think, they've got fantastic company around them now.
And then what about sponsorship? I mean, what happened this time round? Could the team just not attract a sponsor that wanted to sort of, I don't know. I mean, imagine the awareness that they could, any sponsor could get with this big win, but there was nothing there, and as a result, nothing for the players to walk home with.
I think that's more complicated than that, because Netball New Zealand has a number of very good, very strong, very long-standing sponsors like ANZ Bank and Sky Sport, who've been with them for a very long time. I think the difference, though, is that we're looking at a sport that is still semi-professional rather than professional. So these are still, athletes that are having to work part-time jobs in order to fund their ability to participate and to compete on the international level. There's still I guess, and probably quite necessarily, a focus on the development of the system and the ability to bring new, particularly young girls, into the grassroots end of the spectrum. And so, having seen how national sporting organisations, work in New Zealand, Netball New Zealand is doing a brilliant job of just making the sport, delivering the system and the ability for people to participate. But they don't have a lot of loose change rolling around that allows them to take the team to a professional elite level.
Just one more, Rachel. You've had success in the past. You've worked with other sporting organisations. One was the Paralympics in 2016 in Rio, and trying to get an awareness, and we've seen that just take off in recent Olympics. What does Netball New Zealand need to do to get that awareness out there and to change the attitudes that you're talking about?
I think that netball's done exactly what they need to do with performance this morning, in terms of, demonstrating that appetite and that audience is there. It's about being able to then convert that into a real commercial property that other sponsors or commercial partners may be interested in getting involved in. This is something that we did with Paralympics New Zealand in 2016, It's how you tell the story, and it's how you create the package that enables a commercial partner to meaningfully engage, with the sport and be able to use it in such a way that their employees, it really resonates with them, that their customers understand it and can see the genuine link between, for the partnership, but also that there is a really logical, and quite values-aligned fit between the organisation that is the sponsor and the sporting organisation, that is partnering with them.
That's Rachel Froggatt. She's the CEO of Women in Sport Aotearoa. Last year it was reported that top Silver Ferns earners were getting about $130,000 a year. Now, you would have heard her reference to ANZ as one of the sponsors of the Silver Ferns. We did ask them today if they would stump up any cash to celebrate the big win. ANZ has just sent this response. As a major sponsor, ANZ offers the Silver Ferns huge congratulations on their inspiring win, and given the time difference between the UK and New Zealand, Netball New Zealand are still working through their plans, so there could be something more there. I'm sure the players and others around the game, many of the supporters will be looking forward to see whether something more comes from ANZ, one of their major sponsors there, after the stunning World Cup victory. It's 20 and a half minutes past 5. Always keen to get your feedback. Please do get in touch on the text 2101. You can get in touch on email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter as well. Get in touch any way you like about the stories we've featured tonight. Should the Silver Ferns and other women's sports players be paid more or be paid something for winning the sport's highest crown? Do get in touch that way, and we'll see if we can get to some of your feedback and read it out on here. Just coming up to 21 minutes past 5. To guns now. The government has unveiled a second round of firearms law changes in response to the mosque attacks in Christchurch. It's already made certain weapons illegal, and it's set up that buyback scheme we've been hearing so much about. But the second bill will actually be setting up a national register, and it will require licences to be renewed every 5 years instead of the current 10, and impose a licensing regime on gun clubs as well as ranges. Now, I asked Police Minister Stuart Nash how the changes are going to deal with guns on the black market.
About 1,000 guns are stolen every year, or reported stolen every year. The vast majority of guns in the hands of the bad guys come from thefts from good law-abiding citizens. What we want to do is to ensure, first of all, we understand the demographic of gun ownership in this country. We want to know how many guns are here, where they are, but we also want to know that when police recover guns, where they have come from. There will always be a black market, but what we're trying to do is mitigate the risk of a black market growing. In fact, what we're doing and what we believe will happen here is the black market will actually shrink as gun owners take greater responsibility of their weapons themselves.
Okay, now under this system, we already in our laws have the fit and proper person test. These people are going to have to prove that they are fitter and more proper. In what way?
Well, in a number of ways that we think are, reasonably appropriate. So there's about 14 different flags that police can use when someone has applied for a licence. Now, it won't necessarily mean that they won't get a licence. What it does mean is that the police can actually dig a little bit deeper to see if the person does actually meet the fit and proper test.
Okay, so specifically, what does that mean? What information will the police be able to look at, analyse, and have access to that they don't already?
Well, let me give you an example. A lot of what we're talking about is in the arms manual, so it's not codified in legislation. We are putting this into legislation. I mean, it's, for example, if someone's been subject to a protection order, if they've shown no regard to the Act or the arms regulations, and been involved in substance abuse, has committed serious offences against the Act, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's the stock standard, I believe, pragmatic test that the vast majority of Kiwis would expect police to undertake when they are determining if someone is a fit and proper person. Okay,
it's going to cost them more as well, isn't it? You're saying that those costs are not meeting the expenses that the police have each year regulating guns, and that those costs are outdated. What can gun owners expect to be paying?
Well, we're going to go out to consultation with gun owners a little bit later on in the year, but that is not part of the legislation that we're developing at this point in time. But you make a good point. At the moment, it costs about $13 million a year to administer the Act. Police recover about $4 million. So that means that the taxpayer is out of pocket to the tune of about $9 million a year. The taxpayer is subsidising gun ownership to the tune of about $9 million a year. But But as mentioned, these fees are set in regulation, and that is not part of this piece of legislation which we've just really talked about today.
Right, but the whole process, of course, is going to involve more people. It's only going to get more expensive administering this new regime, right? And that's what Federated Farmers have come out today as saying that they're concerned about. They do, it seems from their language, support what's happening here, but they do say that it's they're yet to see really how their system plays out, and they're worried about those costs. They're also worried about practical things, the fact that gun owners loan guns to each other. I mean, have you looked into that kind of thing?
Yes, no, we understand. We understand that, and what I would say to those who have concerns about proposed legislation is it will be in front of Select Committee for 3 months. But we have thought about a lot of the concerns that you've raised. As mentioned, we're going to look at the fee structure, but not as part of this piece of legislation. But what we wanted to do, certainly with the register, is we were very conscious of the fact we didn't want to have a whole new level of administration that took police resources, but nor did we want to have a massive compliance burden on gun owners. Hence the reason why this will be an online system. We do believe it'll be easy to comply with and easy to administer.
There's also increased reporting duties by gun owners when they go through changes in their life. And you've even mentioned in the information there that someone becomes a gambling addict. I mean, this seems to be a little bit blurred. I mean, how will people be able to know if they're a gambling addict, and how is it sort of unrealistic to be expecting people to be coming forward and reporting these sorts of changes?
Well, what we are doing is we're trying to ensure that only those people who are fit and proper to hold a licence actually do hold a licence and own firearms. And that's one of the reasons why we have reduced the licence term from 10 years to 5 years, because a lot of changes occur in someone's life over 10 years. Over 5 years, it's a little easier to understand how those circumstances may affect the fit and proper test. But you really are thinking that the people who may have developed a gambling addiction will come forward and report that to you? Well, maybe they will. But again, what we're talking about here is people who are fit and proper to own firearms, keeping in mind that the ACC has said that over the last 9 years, the cost of firearms-related harm has been about $49 million. So it's not unsubstantial in any way, shape or form. But again, I go back to the point that we're trying to ensure that only those people who are fit and proper can actually get a licence and therefore own firearms. Okay, the first tranche of changes, the way it's been described, got through Parliament with just one dissenting vote. What sort of support are you looking at this time for this round of legal amendments? Well, we've obviously got support of our coalition and supply and confidence partners. My officials have briefed National Party officials, but that is a decision for the National Party caucus to make. And, obviously I don't go to their caucus, but we will hear in good time whether they decide to support this or not. You haven't sounded them out? No, my officials have briefed them. And as mentioned, it's a caucus decision, keeping in mind because of the 3-week recess. I'm unaware if their caucus has met and had the ability to discuss this, but we've certainly briefed them, and we're happy to reach out and work with them in a constructive way. Police Minister Stuart Nash there at 28 minutes past 5. A neighbour living just one door down from Friday's gas explosion in Christchurch says he and his wife narrowly escaped being injured. 5 still remain in hospital, 1 in a critical but stable condition after the blast, which has left 5 neighbouring homes uninhabitable. Conan Young visited the badly damaged home of Barry Hobson, who left his house along with his wife just 20 minutes before the explosion.
The first thing you notice when walking up Barry Hobson's pathway at number 5 Marble Court is a large concrete roofing tile lodged at right angles in his lawn. It's come from the epicentre of the blast, one door down at number 9, one of hundreds of tiles sent high in the air by the explosion before plummeting to earth, smashing into roofs and onto surrounding yards. Mr Hobson says 20 minutes beforehand he decided to visit his daughter. His wife just happened to join him.
19 out of 20 times she's at home, and this particular day she decided to come for a ride with me, so she wasn't home, so she was very lucky. Like if Kate had been home and putting the washing out, she would have been bombarded with all that rubble.
The Hobsons home has sustained major damage, including gibboard that's been blown off walls and ceilings, and windows and doors that have been ripped out of the walls, frames and all, and now lean out at precarious angles. Today's the first time they've had a chance to have a good look around the place.
We got in on Saturday, we got a police escort in here because I'm on medication. I had to get my medication. And so we got in only for about, and got a few clothes. We're only allowed in here for 5-10 minutes and it was someone else's turn.
They're now waiting for a structural engineer to come through and decide if their house can be repaired. It's not the first time the Hobsons have had to leave their home. The 2010 and 2011 earthquakes also forced them to move on.
We were a red zone, we lost our house. And we decided we'd come over the other side of town on a nice flat level playing field, not knowing that the house too long was going to blow up. So I don't know what else can happen to us.
Faye McGill lives at the end of Marble Court. Despite extensive damage inside, her and her husband were allowed to return to their home. Memories of Friday when she was at home looking after her granddaughter are still fresh in her mind.
It rained the bats and shingle, and it was just like, initially I thought with the noise, a plane's come down with that real boom, and I think a lot of us thought that. And little one just said, "What's that, Nana?" And I just said, "It's a wind." But it wasn't a wind. It was incredible.
Faye's husband, John, had his own lucky escape.
The windows had all popped out and it rained glass and shingle which came through the house, and where John would be sitting, a piece of glass like that came through and it's cut all into the leather couch, so it would have hurt him quite massively, but it was just, there must have been an angel looking after us to be sitting somewhere else.
Mrs. McGill didn't know the people who lived in the house that exploded well, but she would often wave to them if she was passing by.
Lovely woman. I do a lot of walking. A lovely woman. I don't know who else was in the house.
The cordon is now down around Marble Court, but the home where the blast occurred is still fenced off. Fire, police and WorkSafe investigators were seen by RNZ poring over what's left of the house as they try to establish what caused the explosion. RNZ has contacted the lawyer for the gas fitter who carried out the work on the property the day before, but has yet to receive a reply. Kei o te tahi aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
RNZ National schools go on high alert for measles. Budding medicinal cannabis players grill officials about the shape of the homegrown industry, and a 13-year-old Christchurch ice hockey player who's scored big in Canada. We'd love your feedback, of course. Get in touch on the text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or at Checkpoint on Facebook, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A lot more to come, but first, here's Susanna Leatawa with the headlines.
The government is to establish a firearms register and make major changes to the licensing regime. In the aftermath of the March 15 shootings, the government made certain weapons illegal and set up a buyback scheme. Now, it says a second bill will set up a national register and require licences to be renewed every 5 years from the current 10 and impose a licensing regime on gun clubs and ranges. And the Police Minister Stuart Nash has told Checkpoint the new legislation will make tracking firearms easier when they're found by police. He says the legislation should get rid of the black market in guns, which owners have, with owners having to take more responsibility for them. It will also widen the scope for police to inquire into the backgrounds of people requesting firearms licences. Taupo's police station is in lockdown tonight after a piece of historic military equipment was brought to the police. The station and several surrounding buildings on Story Place in Taupo were evacuated just after 1 this afternoon. Air New Zealand is investigating after an aircraft was forced to make an emergency landing at Christchurch Airport this afternoon. The flight from Christchurch to Dunedin was forced to turn back after the aircraft's smoke indicator warning light came on. Air New Zealand says the plane has been checked out, but no source of smoke has been found. Auckland Council says it has no evidence yet that anyone was asked to leave the West Wave pool in Henderson for wearing burkinis. It's apologised to the Muslim women who made the complaint, and it has contacted one to hear from them directly. Jane Aiken from the council says it's supportive of any form of swimwear and wants customers to feel comfortable without the fear of judgment. Specialised fire crews have been containing a large chemical spill in a South Taranaki workplace. Fire and Emergency says they received the call this afternoon to Taranaki Bio Extracts on Kohiti Road in Ōkaiawa. It says no injury has been reported. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Flicking over to business news now. Nana Peltier is here in the studio. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
We're looking at a recent survey indicating that wage pressure is building up. So people want, 6 to 9% wage?
Yeah.
Is that going to happen? Or?
Well, it doesn't seem like it will because 2/3 of employers are only prepared to offer up to 3%. Interesting, because past surveys have indicated that people weren't that worried about wages. They were more interested in having flexibility in the workplace, training skills, and that sort of thing. Yeah, they were more interested in those things, but not now. Now they want the money.
They want the money.
They want the money, but employers are they're more prepared to provide those benefits that they were traditionally providing, because I guess they see that as being something that they can afford. But no, wages is certainly going to be a disconnect there. Whether what that means will remain to be seen. But it does show that about half the employees who'd been asking for wages actually got them. So it could be that,
it's worth asking.
It's worth asking. It will be interesting to see whether or not we see a shift there. Definitely.
Can put your application in, Nana?
Oh, you too. Let me know how you do.
Okay, I will. The building industry says it's made this accord with the government has led to greater cooperation with the sector. How's that all happened?
Well, it's also really about labour. So there's critical skill shortages within the construction industry. And one of the things that is a problem is procurement. So one of the concerns that the industry has had is that the government were hiring people to advise them on procurement who really had a background in IT rather than construction. They're saying one of the big issues is that there's not enough skilled people in construction, and that's not just, people who can, use a hammer. They're talking about people with management skills, planning skills, those sorts of things. And they're saying that the Accord is working to address that. So years ago, and I guess we probably forget about this, but we used to have big government departments where they'd hire an architect and a planning person and an engineer, and they'd all work together, and you'd have a training ground. Not now. These days, it's sort of like if you're good, your competitor poaches you, and then the employees are poached from one company to the next. There's no real training ground, and so companies are really struggling to find these trained people. And it's not just locally; it's globally. So when you're looking for someone, you really are competing on that international level for staff. And yes, wages are creeping up for sure.
What's happened on the markets today?
Well, let's see. We finished at a record high, and the NZX Top 50 Index was up 0.2%, 72 points up to a record 10,825, and the New Zealand dollar is also trading quite high. So it's at a 4-month high against the Aussie at 96.2, against the US 67.7, and that's a 3-month high, and against the pence at 54.2, and oil is way up as well, with oil tensions mounting in the Middle East. Yes, indeed. The futures were up 1.4%. That's the Brent crude futures up to $63.35, and that's just over a day.
Wow. We will have a bit more too, of course, on that British and Iran oil tanker issue. That's coming up a bit more before 6. But thank you, Nana Peltier, with everything, the very latest in the business world. And just coming up to 22 minutes to 6. Schools are on high alert for new measles cases in Auckland as pupils return to their classrooms today after the winter holidays. After 68 people have been diagnosed with measles in the last fortnight, with nearly all of those cases in Auckland, nearly 350 people have caught the highly contagious disease this year. And with kids back at school running around and in close contact once again, teachers are keeping a watchful eye. Jordan Bond went along to report.
No worries for some parents at Freemans-based school in central Auckland who say it was a no-brainer to immunise their children.
Yeah, it just makes sense to us. Yeah. We just decided definitely immunising was the way to go. Yeah.
So I think they're really healthy with immunisation. I can feel they are safe.
I want to make sure that my kid is safe and all the other kids around them are safe as well. Some of these diseases are almost eradicated, but now because of people not doing this, it's coming back in and we're making things even worse for other people.
This parent took a more hardline approach to protect her children and asked parents directly if their kids are vaccinated.
I don't associate with kids that aren't immunised. Not so much now, but when they were younger, yeah. Some were a bit funny about it, but you can always tell when they won't share fruit or share toys or anything why.
Children make up just over half of measles cases, and Auckland, especially the south and east of the city, is where the majority of new cases are appearing. As school went back today for term 3, principals are keeping vigilant. The president of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, Heath McNeil, says they have a good idea of who is and isn't immunised from information provided when students enrol. He says today school staff would have looked over students' immunisation records.
So that they can just check that they're all up to date, so that if something needs to be done in terms of communicating with those families, it's ready to hand and we can be proactive about it.
Mr McNeil says it's a terrible disease and he wants the whole school community to be safe. His school, Ormiston Primary, has information for parents, including translated material for new immigrants. But he says whether to immunise is a decision for parents to make, and they'll stop short of recommending a course of action.
It's an individual issue. We're about giving information around the different choices, especially to new immigrants to New Zealand, depending on what environment they've come from, just giving them some information around vaccinations and how they can be done if that's what they're choosing.
He says another thing schools should check is if their staff are fully immunised, and says it could be a gap in knowledge, given vaccination status isn't an interview question. He says if a case did pop up, the Ministry of Health would direct them on the next steps. Richard Dykes, the president of Auckland Secondary Schools Principal Association, says the health and safety of students is paramount.
I would personally support the vaccination program. We want to keep our students safe. If you've got any concerns about your child being at school, then contact the school principal or one of the administration there and have a chat to them. We just want to make sure that we're keeping everyone as safe as possible and healthy.
The Ministry of Health is reminding people vaccinations are free. It's providing support to schools through DHBs and public health units. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
18 and a half minutes to 6. A 78-year-old New Zealand permanent resident says she feared being deported back to the UK after officials in Brisbane couldn't read her electronic visa. And she says staff at the airport scoffed at a letter from Immigration New Zealand that she was carrying as a backup. Australia is not the only country which has problems with reading New Zealand e-visas, with travellers reporting issues in China, Germany and even when they return here to Aotearoa. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
Last week, RNZ revealed Immigration New Zealand has been issuing electronic permanent residence visas and in the same breath insisting visa holders carry a letter confirming they have those very same visas. The service warns that without the letter, people may not be able to board planes flying to New Zealand or face delays at border control. But the letter proved of little use to Lynn Holden when Australian officials couldn't read her e-visa on her return from a European holiday last month.
Arriving in Brisbane from Greece, I was told that there was a very good chance I'd be shipped back to Britain, which was so alarming. And I said, well, why would you say that to me? Well, there's this piece of paper, but you haven't got a visa in your passport.
The Otago resident, who has lived in New Zealand since 1994, says the situation was frightening.
I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I felt terrified. I thought, this isn't happening. It only happens to Tom Hanks in movies. Basically, what they were saying to me was that I'd be stateless, which is a very serious thing to say when you think about it. If you're not sending me back to New Zealand and you're sending me back to the UK where I have not been resident for so many years, that's terrifying.
Ms. Holden says eventually she was allowed on her flight, but no explanation or apology was offered for her treatment. Dunedin resident Brenda Cahill says she had been advised by Immigration New Zealand she could leave the country while her e-visa was being processed. But that didn't work out so well when she tried to board her flight home.
When I got to Darwin to come home, it wasn't, they could not read it on the passport. So they said that I had to have something that they could see. They said that they couldn't let me go because if I didn't actually have the visa, then they would be fined very heavily for actually letting me leave Darwin.
Ms Cahill, who has lived in New Zealand since 1979, says minutes before her luggage was going to be pulled from the plane, her husband was able to forward an email with her e-visa letter to her. American Adam Campbell was prepared to have to show his e-visa letter when leaving Beijing, but surprised to be asked for it on arrival in New Zealand.
I figured, well, of course, Immigration New Zealand must have it on e-visa on their record, but same situation. I handed them the passport, they scanned it, they looked through it, and they said, you don't have a current visa. Then I presented the piece of paper, and then, they checked me in just fine. Didn't have any hang-ups, but it didn't seem like it was an automatic situation where it was just presented, it didn't happen automatically.
A Portland native who now lives in Dunedin, Mr Campbell says at the end of his trip, his e-visa letter was a crunched-up piece of paper at the bottom of his pack.
It overall feels very, not secure. I mean, it's just looking at the piece of paper is just, it's just something I printed off my email. It's got, I think it has the Gmail, logo at the top. It doesn't feel like it's like a high security travel document when you look at it. And I'm actually, quite surprised that's valid.
In a statement, Immigration New Zealand says there could be a range of circumstances that lead to a delay in boarding, and it cannot comment on any individual case without knowing the particular circumstances. It says if there is an issue with an e-visa, an airline will contact the service's border operations team, who will review the case and determine if a person is able to travel to New Zealand. But after issuing more than 1 million e-visas, it is not aware of any such issues being reported. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ponei, ko Robin Martinaho.
It's 14 minutes to 6. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The British Prime Minister Theresa May will chair the government's Emergency Committee Cobra early tomorrow to discuss the crisis sparked by Iran's seizing of a British-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. She is expected to receive updates from ministers and officials and discuss maintaining the security of shipping in the area. Iran has the Stena Impero under guard in the port of Bandar Abbas, claiming it was involved in a collision with a fishing boat. Here's the BBC's Paul Adams.
Iranian Revolutionary Guards boarding the Stena Impero on Friday afternoon, carrying out a 2-week-old threat to seize a British vessel. Iran said the tanker broke the law. The ship's owners and the British government say this simply isn't true.
You must not impair, impede, obstruct or hamper the passage of the MV Stena Imperio.
Earlier, tense exchanges as a British warship, HMS Montrose, attempted to stop the ship being taken.
Please confirm that you are not intending to violate international law by unlawfully attempting to board the MV Stena.
But the Revolutionary Guards were determined. With HMS Montrose too far away to intervene, they warned the tanker to obey.
You are ordered to change your course to 360. 360 degrees immediately. If you obey, you will be safe. Over.
We followed the ship every second and every minute, and the tanker never left international waters. We understand that the crew are in relatively good condition, but it's a stress situation for everyone.
The Stena Impero was sailing through the Strait of Hormuz in Omani waters when it was boarded. At its narrowest, the strait is 20 miles wide. A fifth of the world's oil passes through it. The tanker was forced to turn north towards the Iranian coast. All this is happening because a tanker carrying Iranian oil is still being held by the authorities in Gibraltar. The Grace 1 was intercepted by Royal Marines earlier this month. It's accused of trying to smuggle its cargo to Syria in breach of EU sanctions. Another British warship, HMS Duncan, is on its way to the Gulf to replace HMS Montrose. The government is facing criticism for failing to protect British shipping.
If we want to continue playing a role on the international stage, bearing in mind that threats are changing, all happening just beneath the threshold of all-out war, then we must invest more in our defence, including our Royal Navy.
Iranian television has broadcast pictures showing the tanker now flying an Iranian flag. A local official says the investigation could take a month or more. Officials here in Whitehall have spent the weekend figuring out Britain's response. The Cabinet's Emergency Cobra Committee is due to meet again in the morning, and the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt will make a statement later. I understand he'll say that Britain is working with other countries to improve maritime security, and he'll emphasise the kind of international diplomatic response Britain is trying to achieve.
Paul Adams reporting, and we'll stay with the UK because in less than 48 hours, Britain will have a new Prime Minister, and unless something goes very wrong, that man will be Boris Johnson. On Wednesday, the result of a vote among Conservative Party members on who should lead the party and take over at Downing Street will be known. But today, one of the most senior ministers in the government, the Chancellor Philip Hammond, announced on live television that if Boris Johnson wins, he's gone. Here's the BBC's Nick Erdley with more.
We won't know for sure whether Boris Johnson is the next Prime Minister until the leadership result is announced. But already Westminster is preparing for a Johnson government, and ministers unhappy with the direction he intends to take are planning their departures. Philip Hammond had often been seen as a safe pair of hands in the Cabinet, a mild-mannered loyalist. But he chose a dramatic end to his 9 years at the heart of government, announcing his intention to resign live on the Andrew Marr Show.
Assuming that Boris Johnson becomes the next Prime Minister, I understand that his conditions for serving in his government would include accepting a no-deal exit on the 31st of October. That is not something I could ever sign up to, and I therefore intend to resign to Theresa May before she goes to the palace to tender her own resignation on Wednesday.
The Justice Secretary, David Gauke, had already said he would do the same, and others are likely to follow. They oppose a no-deal Brexit and disagree with Mr Johnson's argument the UK must leave at the end of October, no matter what. But it's not just at home the next PM will face considerable challenges. Ireland's Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, warned this morning a no-deal exit would be bad for everyone, but he insisted the controversial backstop, an insurance policy to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland in all circumstances, had to stay.
If the approach of the new British Prime Minister is that they're going to tear up the withdrawal agreement, then I think we're in trouble. I think we're all in trouble, quite frankly, because that's a little bit like saying either give me what I want or I'm going to burn the house down for everybody.
Mr Johnson's allies, meanwhile, insist no deal must remain on the table. Ian Duncan-Smith said the UK had failed to negotiate hard enough so far.
The EU is a master at hard-nosed negotiation, and I think we got taken for a ride. Well, we got taken for a ride because we weren't. So they've held their position on this, but they would say that. They're not going to negotiate in public, but I am certain that they will engage to discuss what the alternatives are. Otherwise, they want us to leave with no deal, in which case that's very clear.
When the new Prime Minister walks through the door of number 10, they will do so knowing that their time in Downing Street will be far from straightforward.
Nick Erdley at Westminster, just on 8 minutes to 6. Groups opposed to dumping hundreds of thousands of tonnes of dredged waste off Great Barrier Island have taken their fight to the High Court today. Two groups are appealing an Environmental Protection Authority decision allowing Coastal Resources Limited to increase the amount of waste dumped from 50,000 cubic metres to 250,000. Now, our reporter Hamish Cardwell has been at the High Court in Wellington and he's now joining us from our Wellington studio. Kia ora, Hamish, how are you?
Kia ora, Alex. I'm well, thanks. So, oh, sorry, no, you go.
No, well, just, what happened there today? Give us the background on what's going on. This is an appeal, right?
So essentially it's two appeals. Well, one is a judicial review and the other is an appeal. So the Environmental Protection Agency granted consent in February for Coastal Resources Limited to dump material dredged from new and existing marina in Auckland, Waikato and Northland and to put it offshore from the island, which is in the outer Hauraki Gulf. So what I said before, an appeal and a judicial review are being heard together in the name of two groups. So one is the Society for the Protection of Aotea and Community and Ecology Incorporated, and the other is a person called Kelly Moana Clink. Now, there's a lot of overlap in their objections, and so Counsel Sue Gray, she's representing both groups.
Right, okay. And then, so we've seen marches about this decision in the past, and so all eyes were looking on what was going to be heard in court today. What's the crux of their objections?
Essentially, lawyer Sue Gray says consultation was not up to scratch. Now, this is crucially what happened here. The company did not take on board concerns raised by our Māori Advisory Committee. Now, if it had listened to that committee, it would have realised that they were talking to the wrong person. So they spoke to a person that the company had had previous dealings with in the area. Now, the lawyer Sue Gray says that this person didn't actually have the mandate to speak on behalf of iwi who live on the island. Now, this person was associated with Auckland-based members of this iwi, and it seems that, as a bit of background, there's been a breakdown in the relationship between this person who is Auckland-based and those people who are iwi who live on the Great Barrier Island.
Okay, and those people on Great Barrier Island, I mean, did they feel they were able to take part in that submission process?
Not at all. It seems that many feel that they just weren't consulted. Now, Sue Gray told the court the decision to hold the hearings in Auckland, which is where they were held, not on the island. Now, this was a mistake. So initially, it appeared that more submissions had come from Auckland residents, but in fact, a recount was done. It was found this was an error, and in fact, most of the submissions came from the island residents. Now, as she points out, now this is going to make it, holding these hearings in Auckland is going to make it very, very hard for island folk to take part. Now, there's a ferry, but it's relatively infrequent. Flights, really quite expensive. Cell phone reception there is not great, so you can't really Skype, and it's very bad for video conferencing. Now, Sue Gray, the lawyer, she paints this as a David and Goliath fight. Basically, the interests of a large corporate against a small, rural, and pretty poorly resourced community out there on Great Barrier. Now, this is a community that has fewer than 1,000 residents. Now, she says all the benefit goes to Auckland, and island residents just get the short end of the stick. Now, essentially, she says island residents and tangata whenua have had natural justice denied.
Okay, great. Obviously, the company there, Coastal Resources Limited, will have their arguments as well. We do have to go, but a quick summary of what they're going to be arguing.
Oh, look, they came on late. Essentially, they say there was enough consultation and that they met their obligations for consultation under the law.
Great. Excellent. Thank you for your time and your expertise and for visiting the court today. Hamish Cardwell, our reporter there from the Wellington studio, just coming up to 4 minutes to 6. Unbowed, Donald Trump has escalated his attacks on 4 Liberal Democratic Congresswomen. The US president ignited controversy last week when he tweeted the ethnically diverse women should go back to where they came from. 3 were born in the US, while the 4th arrived as a young girl. For Donald Trump's critics, it's a new racist low for a White House that they say is stoking division. But his defenders say the president is no racist, citing, among other things, his strong advocacy for a New York rapper currently jailed in Sweden on suspicion of assault. Here's the ABC's Washington correspondent, Connor Duffy.
You don't really want that Glock, boy. You don't really want to feel them shots, boy. You a B-boy, I'm a black boy.
Edgy, foul-mouthed, bold and wildly successful. New York rapper A$AP Rocky has an unlikely champion in US President Donald Trump as he awaits possible prosecution in a Swedish jail. A$AP Rocky is accused of assaulting a Stockholm man, but with conflicting eyewitness videos, some in America allege his prosecution is evidence of racial bias. Over the weekend, Mr. Trump personally raised the case with the Swedish Prime Minister.
He has tremendous support from the African-American community in this country. And when I say African-American, I think I can really say from everybody in this country, because we're all one.
For now, A$AP Rocky remains in jail, but his friends Kanye West and Kim Kardashian have thanked the White House. The unusual alliance comes as the president reignited the firestorm about his tweets that 4 minority congresswomen, 3 of whom were born in America, should go back to their crime-riddled countries. Today, the president tweeted that the congresswomen known as the Squad are incapable of loving America. Speaking before the latest tweet, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez claimed the president's rhetoric will make Americans feel unsafe.
Men like him have been telling women like me to go back to my own country for a long time. It's not a new thing. What is hurtful is that when he, as an elected leader, does that with thousands of people, he is putting millions of Americans in danger.
The row is dominating news and dividing America. Some polls have shown Mr Trump's support rising among Republican voters in the last week. The president's senior advisor, Stephen Miller, was questioned on Fox News, where presenter Chris Wallace asked just who is allowed to criticise America, citing then-candidate Trump's attack on President Obama, particularly his claim that the American dream was dead.
Saying that America needs to improve to get closer to an America First ideal, as the president did as a candidate, criticizing Obama, criticizing our trade deals, our foreign policy deals, our immigration policies, is out of love for America. Saying, as Representative Ocasio-Cortez did, that illegal immigrants are in effect more American than Americans is fundamentally an anti-American statement.
That's Senior Trump advisor Stephen Miller ending Connor Duffy's report there from the White House. There's been a little bit of feedback coming in tonight, just before we get to the news with Susanna, on netball and pay parity in sport. One person's got in touch on the text saying professionalism may be good for those elite players, but it's not good for the game overall, this person says. It'll be the death of recreational sport in this country. Strong words. You can see that in the dropouts of late teens in many sports. If you're not going to get the money to the money-making level, well then why bother carrying on, this person asks. The pathway for your next tier players is just not there. Sport should be for everyone and for life. The current culture of making it your job is actually not helping the promotion of staying active for life in team sport. Thanks very much for getting in touch. Another person on gun reforms. Won't it be the good guys that give their guns up, leaving the wrong ones in the wrong hands? We did cover a little bit of that with Stuart Nash. You can listen back. More to come after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susanna Leātaua tēnei. Under proposed gun law changes, only citizens would be able to purchase guns in New Zealand. The government has announced the second tranche of reforms in response to the March 15 terror attack. It's proposing establishing a firearms register, reducing the licensing period from 10 to 5 years, tightening the rules to get and keep a firearms licence, and prohibiting visitors to New Zealand from purchasing weapons. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says these changes would have prevented the accused gunmen in the mosque shootings from legally obtaining a weapon.
It will surprise many people to know you are able to come into New Zealand, visit New Zealand and purchase a firearm here. He was an Australian. He's Australian visiting. My understanding is that this provision would have meant that he would not have been able to purchase weapons here.
Jacinda Ardern says these changes will enshrine in law that owning a firearm in New Zealand is a privilege, not a right. The Police Minister Stuart Nash says he believes the establishment of a firearms register will cause New Zealand's black market in guns to shrink. Mr Nash told Checkpoint he's confident the changes will make a real difference.
We want to know how many guns are here, where they are, but we also want to know that when police recover guns, where they have come from. There will always be a black market, but what we're trying to do is mitigate the risk of a black market growing. In fact, what we believe will happen here is the black market will actually shrink as gun owners take greater responsibility of their weapons.
Police Minister Stuart Nash. Taupō's police station is still in lockdown after it was cleared when a piece of historic military equipment was handed in this afternoon. The station and several surrounding buildings on Story Place in Taupō were evacuated just after 1 p.m. and the bomb squad called. The Rotary Club was one of the buildings evacuated. Its secretary Rose Mary Crisp says it's the second time a piece of military equipment has caused an evacuation at the station in the past few months. Schools are keeping a watchful eye for any sign of measles as students return for Term 3 today. Another 68 people have caught the contagious disease in the last fortnight, mostly in Auckland. Almost 350 have now been confirmed with the measles nationwide this year. The president of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, Heath McNeil, says schools have a good idea of students who aren't immunised from information provided during enrolment. He says school staff would have looked over the immunisation status of their classes today,
so that they can just check that they're all up to date, so that if something needs to be done in terms of communicating with those families, it's ready to hand and we can be proactive about it.
Heath McNeil. The Ministry of Health forums for people who have suffered problems after receiving surgical mesh implants are almost full. Registration for the forums opened 3 weeks ago, and more have been added to cope with the demand. But the Ministry has had to cap the number of face-to-face sessions available. The advocacy group Mesh Down Under says there will still be other ways for people to participate. More than 1,000 people have reported problems with surgical mesh to MedSafe, with complications ranging from mild to debilitating. Riot police have brought 2 teenagers down from the roof of a juvenile correctional centre in central New South Wales. It follows a riot in the facility overnight, and a standoff with a group of remaining detainees is continuing. The ABC's Madeline Lewis reports.
The riot squad had been keeping its distance from the building at Carryong's Frank Baxter Centre for the past couple of hours, where several detainees remain on the roof, shouting and throwing objects at police. But just after 1 o'clock this afternoon, a group of at least 10 officers wearing helmets and holding shields moved in on the group. 2 inmates were removed via a ladder and brought to their knees before being handcuffed and escorted away from the site. A number of others remain on the roof. It follows a violent riot overnight where 2 18-year-olds suffered stab wounds and remain in a serious condition at a Sydney hospital.
Madeline Lewis with that report. A deadly oyster parasite appears to have been wiped out in Southland after promising test results. The parasite, Bonamia austraea, was first found in Marlborough in 2015 and then in Stewart Island in 2017, threatening Southland's bluff oyster industry. The Ministry for Primary Industries says results from the latest round of surveillance in March came back negative from Bonamia austraea in Southland. A ministry spokesperson says while the results are encouraging, there is still a risk to uninfected wild oyster populations. The discovery of the parasite prompted more than 1,900 tonnes of flat oysters being removed from Stewart Island. MPI says farmers have been paid $4.8 million in compensation. The next round of testing is in September. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Silver Ferns coach Nolene Dorua is unsure what her future holds after guiding New Zealand to a shock World Cup netball final win over Australia. Dorua will return to Australia tomorrow to resume her coaching role with Sunshine Coast Lightning, and says she'll reassess her plans beyond 2019 at the conclusion of the Australian domestic season in September. Dorua has only been in the Silver Ferns role for 11 months, but says doing both jobs has taken a toll.
It's been quite tiring, but very committed to both programs and making it happen. Just so you know, I won't leave Netball New Zealand in the lurch, or Lightning as well. There'll be a period of time that needs to be transitioned, but we're still working through details, and I sort of just get that will be pushed to the end of the year.
Nolene Dorua. The Irish golfer Shane Lowry is guaranteed a starting spot at the Open Championship for nearly another 30 years after claiming his first major title with a 6-shot victory at Royal Portrush in Northern Ireland this morning. The 32-year-old Lowry says he wondered if he was ever good enough to win a major. The win earns him $3 million and ensures he can play in the event until he's 60. But the most special things, he says, was having his daughter greet him as he came off the final green.
My wife knew no matter what to have her there waiting for me, because if things didn't go to plan, at least she would have consoled me a little bit. So I'm going to be coming back. I have another 27 Opens to play, and she's going to be nearly 30 when I'm playing my last one. That's going to be nice.
Shane Lowry. New Zealand's Ryan Fox recorded his best result at a major, finishing tied for 16th. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Andrew Bailey. He served in the Territorials, he's scaled Mount Cook, he's climbed mountains in Antarctica, he's dragged a sled to the South Pole, and he's the national MP for Hunua, but that's not enough. Recently he followed in the footsteps, or maybe the camel prints of Lawrence of Arabia. He'll explain why on Nights, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. For Northland, fine spells and a few showers. Auckland to Kapiti, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine weather, but the odd shower about Auckland tonight and about Bay of Plenty and Central High Country from tomorrow afternoon. Areas of morning fog as well. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers developing, then turning to scattered rain tomorrow. For Wellington, fine tonight, low cloud or fog tomorrow morning and a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. afternoon. For Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, but low cloud and drizzle developing about coastal Marlborough later tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, low cloud about the east coast and Canterbury Plains with patchy drizzle tomorrow, mainly fine elsewhere. Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's now 8 minutes past 6 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Alex Perrottet here joining you for Checkpoint tonight. First, the government outlawed certain firearms. Now it's making sweeping changes to the licensing regime. Major reforms to New Zealand's gun laws were flagged in the wake of the Christchurch mosque shootings, with the details announced by the Prime Minister today. They include a national gun firearms register and stricter rules around obtaining and keeping a firearms licence. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The buyback scheme for weapons declared illegal by Parliament is now underway, and the government is now looking at the broader regime. Jacinda Ardern says the March shootings highlighted flaws in an outdated system.
Our gun laws date from 1983 and they're dangerously out of date with technology, with trade and ultimately with society. The changes announced today have been decades in the making, and it is now up to this Parliament to deliver in the interests of public and personal safety.
Anyone given a new licence, renewing a licence or buying or selling a weapon will have to sign up to a new national register, which it's believed will take about 5 years to capture the estimated 250,000 gun owners in New Zealand. The Police Minister Stuart Nash says the information will help the police, as at the moment they're operating blind.
They turn up to some call-outs with no knowledge of what they are walking into. Every month, police are called to 200 crimes where there is a firearm involved. Every year, between 800 and 1,000 firearms are reported stolen. They disappear into the black market and many into the hands of gangs.
Licences will also have to be renewed every 5 years instead of 10, and the application process will be more stringent. A new warning flag system will allow police to seek more information in certain circumstances, including where people encourage or promote violence, hatred or extremism, show signs of serious mental illness or commit crimes involving violence or alcohol. Mr Nash says at the moment the police's options are limited.
If someone has an A category firearms licence, which is your stock standard firearms licence, police does not have the ability to go in and inspect the security or the storage of those firearms, for example. What the new regime will allow is for police to give adequate notice and visit a firearms owner at a reasonable time of the day, just to check that their storage and their security is up to scratch.
Ms Ardern says giving the police the ability to follow up when there are red flags is something the public would expect them to be able to do.
The regime that we currently have and the scope of what the police are able to consider is very limited. I think people would expect that the police would be able to consider some of the issues that we are now putting into legislation, but at the moment that's not what the police are able to do. And so this is why this set of reforms are incredibly important for public safety, but also in many ways common sense.
Other changes include only New Zealand citizens being able to get a firearms licence. Visitors will have to bring their own weapon and register them or lease one. The 260 or so gun clubs and ranges will now come under a licensing regime. Ms Ardern has flagged an increase to licensing fees, saying there's a major shortfall between what administering the regime costs and what's collected in fees, but she has not yet put a dollar figure on that. Federated Farmers has expressed its misgivings about some of the changes, in particular compulsory registration, saying it's complex and costly without proven benefits. But it's welcoming the tighter controls on ownership and licensing, saying hopefully the changes will reduce the risk of stolen weapons being used in poaching and the theft of livestock. The Minister Stuart Nash says he doesn't yet know whether the bill, due to be introduced next month, will be supported by the opposition National Party. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's 12 minutes past 6. Netball fans around the country have been celebrating the stunning World Cup win by the Silver Ferns following a tense one-goal win over arch-rivals Australia this morning. It's been 16 years since the Kiwis last claimed the top honour, and netball lovers around the country weren't holding back on the celebrations today. Our reporter Alicia Foon went to capture the reaction from some super fans.
God, those last few minutes, I don't know if I've got any nails left, to be honest.
I turned off the commentary because they were making me nervous, so I watched it in silence, just so that I was like, Okay, yeah, it's finished now. We won, yay.
I'm Australian and my husband's New Zealand, so we were up. We caught the second half. It was amazing.
They're on the spotlight now, and it's been a good achievement, especially when we struggled over the last number of years.
The Silver Ferns are finally world champions again. This morning's win came down to the wire, and it was a victory so sweet you could almost taste it. And Silver Ferns veteran Casey Koppoa's young daughter Maya did exactly that by licking the salty sweat off her mum's shoulder as she held her during a post-game interview.
She's outstanding. Do you like Maya, do you like the taste of the sweat?
The win is inspiring young up-and-comers across the country like Christchurch's St Margaret's College netball teams, who were training today for their own upcoming games.
Yeah, I got up at like 3:30 with Mum, so we sat on the couch and watched it together. It was quite exciting. I think it's so cool just for like Netball New Zealand and stuff, because obviously we've had a bit of a slump like last year, and then just to come back and to win it was like so cool.
Some excitement really. Yeah, left me sitting on the edge seat of the couch.
I felt quite proud of them actually, seeing as they had a fourth at the Commonwealth Games not too long ago, and I feel like it was a really good comeback for them. And it's always good to beat Australia.
Former Silver Ferns captain Julie Seymour, who also works at the school, echoes their praises and says she is extremely proud.
Super excited. It's great to have New Zealand on top of the world. It's been a long time since they've held that trophy, and I think Knowles has really done a great job with this group, and there's some older players that they've been to a lot of World Cups, so it's really nice to see them finally win.
A huge Silver Ferns fan based in Palmerston North, Danielle Bolton, says the win made waking up at 3 a.m. worth it.
And honestly, that game was so tight. It was just a phenomenal game to watch. I watched it in bed, thank goodness. They were neck and neck. It was just, it was an amazing game to watch. Kudos to them.
Despite being world champions, the players won't get any prize money for their win. That's a stark contrast to the Black Caps, who were to split the $3 million the team received for coming second at the Cricket World Cup last week. The Ferns fans had something to say about that.
Kind of upset that we're in the 21st century and like today's society that stuff like this is still going on. I reckon equal amounts to the men, to be honest.
Girls still need to get paid more. It's like in lots of sports they don't get paid enough though. Yeah, definitely more money for them.
Julie Seymour agrees and says it needs to be addressed across the board for all women's sports. But the World Cup win will still be sweet.
Yeah, it would be lovely, but in the end, I think just getting that medal round their neck and just the memories that they've created will be worth $1 million to them.
Talk of a parade to celebrate the Silver Ferns' success and return to New Zealand have begun, but details have yet to be finalised. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Fern tēnei.
Now, the legendary Australian netball coach Norma Plummer has lauded the Silver Ferns World Cup win over Australia, crediting Nolene Taurua for her masterclass in coaching. Plummer, who infamously described the 2003 Silver Ferns as a bunch of scrubbers, was the Aussie coach from 2003 to 2011, but has been working with South Africa in recent years. She was in Liverpool for the gripping final and told our reporter Nita Blake-Person that Taurua had managed to bring New Zealand back from 4 years in netball wasteland.
I think even before the game started, most people had tipped New Zealand, and I think Nolene's done an absolute outstanding job.
You always thought the Kiwis were going to take it then?
Yeah, I did actually, because I just felt there was something missing with the Australian side. Looking at the games overall, I just felt Nolene was going to outcoach it. I've got a pretty good relationship with Nolene. She's coaching my back end for South Africa. She's got two of my players. I was up there a couple of weeks just before we all left for the World Champs and sat down, and we had a pretty in-depth, tactically I think we think very similarly, and certainly on players. So I never felt New Zealand wasn't on the money to go in there and give it a good shake. I actually sort of look at New Zealand sometimes and think, you guys probably don't back your own enough. The thing is, in all the years that we played, okay, Australia's won 11 out of 15 now, but seriously, it's gone down to the wire by 1 or 2 goals, and I've been a coach that has beaten New Zealand by those margins. I think you have to give credit where it's due to our numbers in Australia, and the amount that we have compared to the numbers you have in New Zealand. You've always been able to produce it, and I felt when things did go bad, no one was backing what you'd always had. So I couldn't see why you couldn't come back. You're a country that loves the game, so you're going to have the players coming through. It just means, that your pathways have got to be right.
Do you think it came down to the coaches more than the players then?
I certainly think Nolene had the options on what she was going to work, and she wouldn't have been scared to use them if she needed to. Look, I think if you look at New Zealand, they've been in probably the wasteland for 4 years or more now. To this day, I never understood why they never interviewed Nolene at the start. She was always the coach that had actually been, winning the finals and presenting all the time, even with the ANZ. So, what she's been able to do, I guess, in the short amount of time that she's had the team back, has been fantastic.
What specifically has she done? Because it's been a long time for New Zealand and a pretty incredible turnaround. What has she been able to pull off here?
Well, I think she dropped a few players to give them a bit of a message about, you want to play in this, don't come in underdone. You've got targets to meet, you've got to meet them. And that sometimes, is tough for a coach if she's dropping a top player. But the team she picked now was ready. I think they all got the message, and I think they've all gone off, done their homework, trained hard, and the selections worked out for you.
Really, it sounds like it was a masterclass in coaching.
But also I've got to put one bit of a dig in for the Aussies, and that's Amelia Ann. She's been playing so well, and her shooting, of course, and she's been coached by my assistant coach, Nick Cusack. She was trained in Australia, she played most of her junior career there, and that beautiful shot she had going, she killed it the other night. She was outstanding. So I think you've had a little bit of Aussie help there.
Former Aussie coach Norma Plummer speaking there to our reporter Nita Blake-Person at 20 minutes past 6. Meanwhile, the Silver Ferns victory has reignited the debate about a pay parity in sport. That's after it was revealed that the Ferns won't be up for any prize money. Just a week after the Black Caps netted $3 million for coming runners-up in the Cricket World Cup, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she thinks most New Zealanders would like to see the country's sports stars rewarded for their achievements, big and small. Ms Ardern says she hasn't looked in detail at the differences between different sporting codes, but there is a question around fairness.
And I know this is an issue generally around the equity of treatment between different codes, but particularly different genders in sport that our Minister of Sport's been very focused on. This particular code, though, I haven't looked into those differences between netball and cricket. But as a general principle, I think New Zealanders would like to see fair acknowledgement of our sports people when they reach the top of their code, and that should include netball. Obviously, though, we're all very proud, and I think people will want to see recognition of that, and that would include, I imagine, having the chance to welcome them and the cup home.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. It's 21 minutes past 6. You're listening to Checkpoint or watching it if you're watching online, Facebook or our website, rnz.co.nz. You can watch it on Face TV as well as Sky on RNZ National. Potential players in the budding medicinal cannabis industry have spent the day grilling officials about what a homegrown industry might look like. The Ministry of Health is considering giving patients better access to medicinal cannabis products and allowing people to grow and to manufacture them. As part of its public consultation, it's holding sessions across the main centres. Our reporter Tom Furley went along to the first one in Auckland today.
Expectations are high, with potential growers, importers and manufacturers poised to take advantage of New Zealand's newest industry. At the Holiday Inn near Auckland Airport, more than 100 people gathered to find out more about what regulations they'll be up against. Among them was Dargaville local Kelly Retimana.
At the moment, I'm doing the investigation on what's actually required to get a licence, what it means once we've got a licence. I think the costs of manufacturing, how to get involved in the industry, and while it's still at the boom stage, and rather than in 5 years' time when everything's starting to shrink.
Kelly Retimana was one of many who asked officials about various elements of the scheme, how licensing will work, who will be able to prescribe products, and rules around importing and exporting. Some raised concerns about the potential price tag for licensing, which could cost in the tens of thousands. However, with more than 100 in the room, people like Chris Fowley, CEO of research organisation and medicinal cannabis producer Zcan, says things could change.
I'm really surprised. There's a huge amount of people here. The ministry's forecast for their fees are based on only 16 licences, and so therefore they're really expensive for each one because their fixed costs are only divided by that many. I think they've got that completely wrong, and they're going to have a lot more. So I think they should expect, that they're going to get a lot, and those fees are probably going to come down.
But business will likely depend on doctors and specialists, with medicinal cannabis products only available on prescription.
It's really important that there are products available that doctors have confidence in prescribing, because they are essentially the bottleneck or the throttle, and that the size of the market and therefore the viability of any of these businesses that are wanting to help patients here in New Zealand and overseas, that will be determined by the doctors.
Industry membership group, the Medical Cannabis Council, currently has 8 licensed members, but having seen the turnout today, it's expecting many more. Its General Manager Sally King says ensuring prescribers understand the products well will be the biggest challenge, but many in the sector are also eyeing up other markets.
It's a small market here, and most of the people who are engaged are looking at the export market in order to help to cross-subsidise really what the price of the local product will be.
So what markets would they be looking to serve?
Exporting out to America, Australia, potentially Canada, wherever cannabis is legal.
Chris James, MedSafe Group Manager for the Ministry of Health, says they have been hearing concerns about a lack of information to help health professionals and patients make good decisions.
We have a role around information about the use of medicinal cannabis products and finding how do we present that information, both industry and in the government, to healthcare professionals and consumers so they know what they're dealing with when they make a decision. So, yeah, definitely a joint responsibility.
Another discussion aimed at health professionals is being held in Auckland tomorrow before the sessions move to Christchurch and Wellington next week. Public submissions close on the 7th of August. The medicinal cannabis scheme is independent of the recreational use of cannabis, which will be put to a referendum at next year's election. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's 25 minutes past 6. A 13-year-old Christchurch high school student has scored a scholarship to take his ice hockey talents overseas. Jacob Carey is a standout player in the sport, but professional opportunities in New Zealand are still limited. Now he's preparing to travel to Canada for an opportunity of a lifetime. Our sport-challenged South Island reporter Logan Church and videographer Simon Rogers went down to the local ice rink to meet him.
It's a cold Christchurch evening and ice hockey training is about to get underway at the Alpine Ice Rink. It's a growing sport in New Zealand, but there is no professional industry here. It's just not big enough. But that's not stopping 13-year-old Jacob Carey, who's just been offered a golden opportunity.
I'm going to Canada to play hockey, under 16s AAA in Windsor, Ontario. Went over there last Christmas with a Slovakian-based team, which guy down south had connections with, and then somehow stuff happened and I ended up playing for them. Met them for the first time game day, met them for the first time, and I played, and then we billeted over there with our families, and I met a family over there and they offered to take me in for 10 months and I could attend a local academy.
Ice hockey is a sport really quite like none other. First on goes the skates, the shin pads, those are taped up. Then what I would call body armour, large shoulder pads. Arm pads, your team colours. Finally the helmet and you're good to go. And do they go. It's hard, fast and sometimes brutal. For Jacob, this whole thing started with a bit of brotherly rivalry when he was 7.
My brother started playing ice hockey and then I just sort of followed on because I wanted to score on him and beat him.
Jacob will be leaving for the A21 Academy in Windsor, Canada in August, where he will both study and play ice hockey, and he has big dreams.
Ultimately I want to make the NHL, but before that you've got to make junior A and everything else. But if you don't make hockey a career, you've got to be academic as well, so you can have a backup career choice.
Coach Dean Tonks played professionally in England for 9 years. including for Team Great Britain.
A highly skilled player. He's fortunate that he's got a good body size compared to other players his age, which always helps. His skating's come on over the last few years.
Dean Tonk says ice hockey is becoming more popular in New Zealand. The New Zealand Ice Hockey League has 5 teams across the country, but there is also under 20, under 18 and under 15 leagues. But the cost of it can be prohibitive. Skates will set you back about $1,500, sticks another $400.
And even our national team players are paying $5,500 to go away and represent the country, and I think that's something the country, I believe, needs to look into. Even back in the UK, which is still quite a small sport, it's free to play for the national team from the age of 14.
And Jacob's dad, Neil, knows that cost all too well. But he says they have managed to get a partial scholarship to help fund the trip and study, which would have otherwise been unachievable.
We're talking about 35 to 40,000 to go for a full year at an academy in Canada. We've probably got a fair percentage of that.
Jacob's off in August. In the meantime, though, it's a case of train, and train some more.
Proud, Dad? Proud, very proud. Absolutely, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Just before we leave, you can actually go back and check that video report from Logan Church, Simon Rogers there, the budding Canadian ice hockey star Jacob there going around the rink. Look, a little bit of feedback before we go. Feedback coming in on the Silver Ferns not being up for any prize money, unlike the Black Caps who netted $3 million for tying with England and then coming second. This texter says, no cash here, what the, and then we can't say that word. Go the Silver Ferns, congrats, but no cash. Geez, go the mighty Flying Kiwis. Very, very excited, but a bit frustrated. But meanwhile, Matthew has been somewhat provocative, saying, I think the women netballers should get paid the same as the men netballers who beat them in the Cadbury series. And then Greg, to compare netball with cricket is bizarre. The money in cricket comes from player base and lots of viewers. Go and ask India for prize money. That's where it comes from in cricket. Thanks to everyone for your feedback tonight. Of course, we're back tomorrow. Good night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says the new gun laws will demonstrate that owning a firearm is a privilege, not a right. The new laws will include a firearms register. Air New Zealand has been unable to find the source of a smoke warning light that forced a Dunedin-bound plane to return to the Garden City after a few minutes in the air this afternoon. Fire crews have contained a large chemical spill in a South Taranaki workplace. And Great Barrier Island groups opposed to the dumping of huge amounts of dredged waste off their island say Aucklanders' interests are being put ahead of theirs. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
People who are drinking kava are not getting messed up. It's a social thing. Like I said, it promotes positive discussion.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
She has kind of hairdo that I want right now. She's dyed, she's like frosted her tips. Yeah, just a little blonde on the end of the mullet.